Okay, so I wanted to go over a little bit of the timing procedure in this engine. So it's really a pretty simple procedure. It only takes about 5 minutes to kind of understand the timing procedure on this engine. So first, let's go over the parts of the engine here that are important to the timing. There are the camshafts, and you'll see in this picture there's the front and the back, what I'll call the front and the back of the camshafts. The back side, you'll notice here, has these important little slots inside the cams. And on the other side is where the sprockets bolt to the camshafts. So you'll see the 4 bolts on the exhaust side, and you'll see the one big bolt for the intake side. So those are the important parts for the cams that you'll notice. And you also see the crankshaft pulley. Right there on the crankshaft pulley, it indicates the various stages of where the pistons are positioned in the engine. The main one you'll be concerned about is top dead center, which I even marked here on the engine. The next thing we'll talk about is the tools. There are a whole bunch of tools that go along with this. These tools are important to timing. So there are 2 main tools that play an important part of the timing. The rest of the tools, right-hand part of the screen, those don't actually do any timing. They just make sure that the camshafts don't break while you're doing the various procedures and turning the engine over or torquing bolts. So we're not going to talk about those. We're going to just zoom over that. Just know that those are used to make sure the camshaft doesn't kind of snap as it's or come out of alignment. The main procedure here in the 5-minute lesson is to make sure that the bolts are all out of the exhaust sprocket there. You see those 4 bolts. On both sides, those 4 bolts are removed so that the sprocket can turn without actually turning the camshaft. Equally, on the intake bolt is loose so that the sprocket on the intake cam can also spin while the engine is being turned. You want the camshafts to be locked in place by using that the cam lock tool and sticking it in those 2 slots and bolting it to the head there, while you can freely spin the engine around to get it to the right spot. So that means the camshafts are completely disconnected from the engine spinning. That's an important part of this. So the camshafts being locked into place allows you to spin the engine to the first position, top dead center. You'll see right there is marked on the crankshaft pulley. That little pin, once you find the right spot, it's marked on the engine and on the pulley. That pin goes into the top dead center slot. That makes sure now that the engine pistons are in the right place for the beginning of the timing procedure. Now, what you're going to do is put those screws back into the sprocket for the exhaust, and you're going to tighten down the intake bolt. Not all the way, but about halfway torque, maybe even a little bit less. You don't want to torque it very much because the little camshaft holder tool isn't strong enough to hold the full torque of trying to torque down that bolt. That's what those other tools are for, to actually hold the camshaft intake, because the torque on that one bolt is very, very tight. And you'll end up snapping your camshafts or something like that. Now, once you have those 2 in place, and you bolt that down. You're going to pull out the pin from the crankshaft and do one full revolution. In the meantime, take out that cam lock tool. So now the crankshaft and the camshafts are locked together. Once you put those two bolts in, once you do that full revolution, you're going to see if that cam lock tool slides back in those two slots exactly where you put them in. That's it. That's one side of the engine timed. If that slides in and out easily, you're good to go. Next, the other side of the engine, same procedure, except you're going to spin the engine around twice. It has to do 2 full revolutions. Then you can lock the cams into place, bolt it down, and once that's done, your engine is fully timed. That's it. So you're good to go. If you can now spin the engine around, see if that cam lock tool slides back into place easily. If it does, you're good. If it doesn't, you're going to have to kind of rejigger it and try it again. And I talk about that a little bit later, where I actually did do that. So that's it. That's timing the engine. So while I'm here, I might as well talk about a few parts of the engine, just so that you're aware of where things are, in case open the hood occasionally, put oil in it. What are these parts? So you'll see, I already described with the camshafts. Down here is the oil pump, and right next to that is the water pump. Over here is the intake and the outlet of the coolant. And here is the coolant temperature sensor. And in this housing here is the actual thermostat, which opens and closes. It's also recommended that this be set to a lower temperature. There's a lot of talk about opening up at I think 165 degrees Fahrenheit as opposed to the 175 that is normal. It's talked about a lot, potentially as a Porsche core causing issue if it opens too high. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but you know, it's very easy to replace that while the engine's in the car. The other parts here, you'll notice there is the hall sensor, the camshaft position sensor. That's pretty neat. It's just a little magnetic sensor, and there are little arrays on the ends of the camshaft that tell that sensor where the camshaft is, so that the computer knows where exactly the camshaft is in moving degrees to the right or left. This plays into that vario cam, so you'll see that there. The other parts that are missing here, you'll notice right here goes the alternator, right here goes the power steering pump, and right here goes the AC. So those are the main parts of the engine from the front side. I'll go over the other parts of the engine on the top and towards the back of the engine later. But those are the sensors on the front. And in here, right here, you'll see the place where you actually do have seen me from the other episodes, using this port right here to actually put the circlips into the pistons. That's that hole right there. And there's a bolt that goes in that hole. Okay, that's it. Thanks, guys. Alright guys, well, we got the engine timed. The phases are all correct. I've checked the engine, here. This side is bank 1 with cylinder 1 through 3. Bank 2, cylinder 4 through 6. 6 was the bad boy, but that's all fixed now. We still have the valve covers to do, clearly. But I did go ahead and check the timing on these in terms of TDC. When the engine is at TDC, you the procedure is to take this tool and kind of jam it into, might be hard to see, but these little slots here, and if you're able to kind of slide it in there and it matches after a few revolutions and putting it back at TDC, your valves are in the right spot. Now, a couple of things to note that were concerning as a kind of new engine builder on here. One is bank 2. The timing is perfect. This tool slides right in the slots the camshaft when it's at top dead center. When this is at top dead center, this will slide in. On bank 2, it's pretty much dead on. On bank 1, it's off by a teeny half a degree, which I'm told I did go in and fix the exhaust to be exact. You can see the tool slides easily into the exhaust valve, and this meets up here. And then here, you can see it just, this is out of alignment here. Hold on. Just want to kind of demonstrate. The intake cam is off by just a shade of a degree. I'm told this is not perfect, but the intake can be adjusted by the computer using the VarioCam here. So I'm hoping this isn't enough of a problem that it'll cause a running issue. If it is, I have to go untorque this bolt and redo the timing. I can technically do that while it's in the engine. In order to fix this and have it be super duper perfect and right in alignment, I have to buy a new, basically this bolt here is torqued to a degree, and it's a stretch bolt, and if I untorque it, the bolt is no longer usable. I've decided to proceed here, just because this is a variable cam mechanism, meaning I believe if I read the specs right, it can adjust the degrees of rotation on the camshaft up to 40 degrees. So the fact that this is off by a tiny little bit of a degree here, I think is within tolerance. I'm taking a risk, obviously, there. I prefer it to be perfect, but I didn't think it was worth kind of rejiggering the whole thing, especially because this is a variable timing camshaft, especially the intake valve, and that's the one that's not perfect. And I did end up adjusting the exhaust cam to be perfect in alignment. That is not a variable cam, but the exhaust isn't quite as important as the intake, obviously. Still important, the whole thing is. So I went through and I tested basically by spinning the engine clockwise, which is the operation of the engine. The way it works is, and because I don't have the valve lift covers on, I can see the engine firing order is 16, 24, 35. So 1, if you put your hand in, you can see that kind of lifters down there. If 1 is going down, the intake valves, And the next one to go down is number 6. So if you feel 1 goes down with your fingers and you look over and you see 6 going down, that means that your engine is properly timed. You can go through and test the rest of them. I did. I went in and the next one to go down after number 6 is number 2. And you can feel that go down. You can actually watch the cam push down also. So that's a good way to see. The next one to go down is number 4 over here. And you can watch and feel it go down. The next one to go down is 3. And watch and go down and watch that go down. And the last one to go down is number 5. But I did find a bad timing chain tensioner on number 2. Bank number 2. This is a bad timing chain tensioner. Bad? No, donut. Before putting the timing chain tensioners in, you pump them up full of oil. They're basically a spring. Well, all the rest of there's 3 timing chain tensioners altogether in this engine. 1 for the IMS chain, 1 for the bank 1 timing, and bank 2. Well, bank 1 and the IMS, pump those up full of oil, no problem. Got a couple pumps in, and they were fully pumped up full of oil. Well, bank number 2, it doesn't matter how much you pumped oil into the hydraulic. It's again, these are hydraulic lifters. No matter how much oil got in there, it would not hold tension at all. Like, just not even close to holding tension. Sat there and pumped it 20, 30 times. And again, these are $150. But, me being 100% certain this is bad, I'm going to go ahead and replace it. But that didn't stop me from timing the engine, getting that engine timing in place. So the engine timing should be fine. There's enough tension on these chains right now so it won't skip a tooth, or it's very taut. The chain is extremely taut. So I'm not too worried about the timing being off, just because the tension on this is extremely tight. It's just not holding the oil tension in there. So you guys may run into this, I don't know. But you do need to kind of, when you're filling your tensioners for the chain tensioners, you need to make sure that they hold the pressure. And this one definitely did not. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to put the rest of the engine back together while the tensioner comes in. Once it comes in, I'm just simply going to replace this tensioner, removing the tensioner and pulling it out and putting a new one back in. So long as the engine is held in place by all the timing tools and the top dead center positioner, this is something that's normal to do, to replace a tensioner without redoing all the timing. So long as all the tools are in place, you'll be good to go. Because this is kind of what happens when you do an IMS replacement. So lots of information about this. These tensioners are removable and replaceable without a whole redo of the timing, so long as you can get those timing tools in there. No worries about that. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to reassemble the engine and put the timing covers back on. That's it. We're going to keep on going. Oh, one more thing. These bolts, a lot of discussion about these not being reused. It was enough discussion to worry me. So while I'm in there, I am going to go ahead and kind of replace these one at a time. Make sure it holds the timing, obviously. But these I did order at the same time I ordered the chain tensioner. I just had 8 of these shipped, and I'm going to replace these. 59 cents. And I didn't even realize that these needed to be replaced. So that was my mistake. And I can actually, oddly enough, put the valve covers on fully, and the valve covers do not cover up these bolts. So I can continue on with the assembly of the engine. When the bolts and the tensioner come in, I can just put those in and seal this up. Basically, at that point, we're really just putting the rest of the accessories back on the engine. At that point, the long block of the engine is complete. Everything is in place. It's really just a matter of putting all the water coolants and back in place, and the intakes and the exhausts on it. That's it. We're going to continue on. Thanks, guys. All right, so we're about to install the valve cover. The main portion that needs the most sealant is the bottom part, gravity-wise. This is where most of the oil sits, at the bottom of the valve cover pan. If you're used to working on V6, V8s, this is not normal, right? The valve cover sees, it can leak a little bit, but in a horizontal 6, this is actually the surface area that sees the most amount of oil sitting on top of it, just because of the nature of a horizontal 6. This is how the valve cover is oriented. So all the oil that comes up and gets sprayed in the valves and camshaft just kind of pools down here at the bottom. So this valve cover and the sealant is especially important to this process. So I've gone ahead and lubed up this valve cover is a matched set with the head, meaning you cannot just swap out a different valve cover with another one because the camshaft journals are actually built into the cover itself. It just seems like a terrible idea to me. I'm not an engineer on this level, but the valve cover and the journals being in the same valve cover just seems like a recipe for disaster to me. I'm not the one building the blueprints. I'm just remaking the engine here. So we're going to concentrate the sealant at the bottom here where the oil is going to pool, and the scavenge pump picks it up. Actually, the scavenge pump sits right here and kind of picks up the oil and sends it back into the pan. So I'm just orienting yourself and how the cover sits. So we're just going to cover this with the Loctite. The one that Porsche recommends is a Loctite 5900. So this is the sealant we'll be using for the valve cover. This is the sealant we used for the case. Here we go. Everybody, welcome back. We're going to talk about the continuing build of the engine. Still kind of piecing things together and figuring out how they went. Even though I have video, I don't remember exactly where everything went on this engine. So kind of slowly piecing this back together. There's a lot of parts and a lot of electrical connections and vacuum hoses and a whole lot. And I'll kind of show you what the difference is when you're testing out these hydraulic chain tensioners, which I didn't really find a good description of on the internet. But if the chain tensioner, timing chain tensioner is not pushing down on this chain hard enough, it will skip a tooth as the engine is running. Also, if it's not pushing down on the chain at a constant rate, the chain slack causes all sorts of damage to your paddles and the insides of the gears. So a bad chain tensioner can cause all sorts of problems, including the timing chain breaking, which kind of on the extreme side, but lots of engine wear if it's not working correctly. And so this is how you tell the difference. I've got a new one and an old one, and I just wanted to show you guys what the difference between a bad chain tensioner and a good one is. So here's an example of a good one and a bad one. Here, we've got the brand new one here. We've got the bad one I just pulled out of the engine. I was using it to do timing. Now, the reason why I noticed it was bad is when I went to go pump it up, which is basically taking it, sticking it in the oil, letting the air bubbles kind of trickle out. And what should happen in a good one is when they press down on the chain, you'll notice that it's springy right now. You can see that. It's pretty springy. I can push all the way down without too much effort. And what should happen in a regular one that's correct is I should be able to only pump that maybe 5-10 times max. And once it gets pumped up, you won't be able to press it anymore without really kind of shoving it down. So you'll notice in this bad one, you can just keep pumping it forever. Doesn't matter how hard you pump it, whatever valve in there, I think it's the check valve, whatever valve in there is let go. So it's just holds no tension whatsoever. So I just got this new chain tensioner, which, believe it or not, these are $150, these chain tensioners. New. I don't know if you want to get them used or not, but so what should happen is when you put this in the oil, kind of shake around, get the air out of the valve. This was springy to begin with, so we'll pump it down. So what should happen is after a minute. All right, now we've got it to the point where we can't push hardly anymore. Yeah. Oops. It's pretty messy. So that's the new one. And yeah, the other one, you could just push all day long and it wouldn't budge, or it would go up and down all the time. So now this one's fully charged and we can try and get it back in. Now we're gonna put it in. Now you have to push really hard. Now you gotta grab onto a piece of metal and try and push it in. And kind of get a few threads started at least. much. We gotta torque it down. All right, that's it. All right, now we've got a fixed chain tensioner in there. Now we can continue with the installation of all the wiring harness, because I couldn't put that in until I couldn't continue until this was in, because the rest of the steps are going to cover up this bolt. So we've got the wiring harness here. I got to remember how this power steering instrument goes. We got to torque down. Note to self when building the installation order here. So far, I've discovered that the oil cooler can go in. The knock sensors have to go in first, because the secondary air pump has to go down. This is the bracket to it. Not totally sure what this thing does exactly. But the wiring harness obviously has to go down in place here. Secondary pump, starter, power steering. So far I can tell that's the order. This has to go in, these brackets that hold on the, in the manual they call these silencers, but in America we call these mufflers. This is a bracket for the muffler. This has to go on because it ends up getting covered by bolts, by these air oil separators, PVC, whatever you want to call them. And I'm not envying the vacuum hose situation, because I can never figure those out from the diagrams. You got a bolt, you can bolt on these camshaft position measuring devices. They can get bolted on, but those knock sensors have to go on right after you install the wiring harness. So this wiring harness goes on, knock sensors go on. I may have to tear this all apart if I get this wrong. This power steering has to go underneath. So really don't bolt anything down until you really... I have a lot of pictures that I had to take of the engine to really get to the state where I am now. I really don't. There's like a million connectors here. I don't remember where they all go. I'm hoping I do eventually. Some of them are pretty obvious. I mean, it's good. I totally forgot to mark what cylinders, but luckily, by the position of how these are wrapped up, luckily, you can easily tell which cylinders these go to. This wiring harness. But before I can start strapping on the cylinder connections, I have to install the intake, and the fuel rail has to go on top of the intake, and this part of the harness goes on top of the fuel rail. That's the order of operations there. So it's a little bit difficult to figure out order of operations, and there isn't like a ton of great stuff out there tell you what order the rest of the engine goes together on. So I'm trying to help as much as I can. The other thing that was annoying was my gasket kit didn't come with all the gaskets I needed for some of these. It's a little weird. They came with a weird assortment of gaskets that some of these were missing for the oil cooler. I mean, why would that be missing? Yeah, this is the last point at which you want to discover missing gaskets, when you're about to put the engine back together and fire it up. And then you got to wait a week for a part to come out, like this timing chain tensioner. I had to wait a week for that part to come out, or not a week, but yeah, almost almost a week. And I couldn't put the engine back together. I guess everybody knows that pain that has done this before. All right, well, we're going to continue on. I'm just going to set you down and probably do a time lapse, me trying to figure out the order of operands for the engine going back together here. All right, I want to take you over a brief overview of what we've put on so far. We've gone ahead and put on the intake manifold and got all the inner wiring. I finally found a diagram. I've been looking forever. I finally found it after I've finished mostly. But most of all the wiring is done, and the PVC just needs to be buttoned up. Power steering's in, needs the top part, but starting to look like an engine, really. Got the fuel injector. The fuel rail is right here. Fuel injector is right here. And they should slide into these ports right here. If I can get that circle right in front of you is the port they slide into. Just trying to figure out how deep these are supposed to go. Well, I guess not that far. So I'm going to be sliding those injectors into the port and bolting them on. Once the fuel injector rail is on, really it's just spark plugs and some of the electrical connections. Alright guys, I have to undo some work I did last night. Installed the alternator, but completely forgot to install the oil filler neck, which is right down on there. Whoops. So either I have to take the alternator out. I think that's what I'm going to do. I forgot the oil filler neck, and we're going to have to put that back in. But once we do that, then we're on to coolant lines that run up and down back behind the engine, and of course the mufflers. Connect up all the electrical components and vacuum tubes. I'll do my best to try and figure that stuff out. Luckily, there's not a ton of vacuum tubes that I can see that aren't obviously where things go. The kind of a order of operand thing here, that air oil separator has to go in. So you have to be prepared to put in both when you go and screw this down. So there's a washer or a sealer here, which my kit did not come with, so I just use some make a gasket kind of stuff. It's not a high pressure element. So the air oil separator goes on top of that intake valve here down into the engine. This is the AC bolt, which kind of goes up through here, which is really hard to get at. And the bottom part here is actually part of this secondary air pump, which is a totally different component than this. They just use the same screw housing screw. So just wanted to point that out for you guys when you're trying to put this back together. It's kind of confusing. All right, we're going to continue on.